Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Herford, and I'm your teen librarian here at Bentonville Public Library. Today, I'm very pleased to introduce our program with the Arkansas Pioneers Home and Ways of Life with BPL Online. Today's presentation covers why people migrated to Arkansas during its early history and lifestyles of early Arkansan pioneers. We will learn all about log cabins and the life on a pioneer homestead. This special program is presented by Ms. Amy from the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program. It's also recommended for young people entering grades 4 and up. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Ms. Amy.
Hello, my name is Amy Milliken, and I'm the Education Outreach Coordinator for the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program. It is my job to go into the schools and teach your kids. I have many presentations. They are all on our website. You can either go to www.arkansaspreservation.com. You're welcome to reach out to me. My email address is Amy Milliken. It's amy.milliken@arkansas.gov, and send me any requests or any questions you may have. Feel free to send that to me. I work with homeschool groups, school groups, church groups, adult education groups. Just anybody who wants to learn anything, I'm happy to come and talk to you, or do this virtually, which is new for all of us, but I am willing to do that as well. So I am going to attempt to share my screen and get this presentation started. If you will hang with me for 1 minute. Okay.
I can see your screen, so I think we're good.
Okay then. So if you can still hear me, I will go ahead and get this presentation started. It is on Arkansas Pioneers, their homes and ways of life. But first, a little bit about my agency. AHPP seeks to identify, evaluate, register, and preserve Arkansas's cultural resources that are reflected in the built environment. It is due to National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 that basically hands this responsibility over to my agency. This official list of the country's cultural and or historic resources that are worthy of preservation is administered by the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program. Now, there are certain criteria that need to be met in order for a building or site to be added to the National Register. Maybe something important happened there. Here we see Little Rock Central High School, and as we all know, in the 50s, it was the site of school integration here in Arkansas. With the Little Rock 9, this is an event that not only made statewide, nationwide attention, but actually got worldwide attention. And for that reason, Little Rock Central High School is on the National Register of Historic Places. Every building or site that we will see in this presentation, each one of those structures are on the National Register. Maybe someone important lived there. This is Bill Clinton's boyhood home in Hot Springs, Arkansas. It is still standing. Of course, we know Bill Clinton was the President of the United States. The important thing I like to bring up here is that when a structure is in private ownership, and many of the structures that are on the National Register are, it is up to that owner whether they want to keep that structure up, or they could plow it down and put a parking lot there if they want to. So of course, we have a lot of incentive to try to encourage those owners to keep those structures up so that future generations can learn of them. Maybe it has archaeological significance. There are a couple of sites around Arkansas. You've got the Parkin site, the Maynard Hughes site, the Toltec Mounds. All of these have archaeological significance, which means we can find artifacts there that educate us about the people that lived there long ago. Maybe it has some sort of archaeological significance. I'm sorry, architectural significance. This is the Rosalie House, which is a Queen Anne style. It is located in Eureka Springs. I think a lot of times kids call this the gingerbread house, and it is because a lot of the gingerbread trim that is up around the awnings and the windows. It has just a very, quaint look to it. But this house being one of the first in Eureka Springs to use this style. That's what got it on the National Register of Historic Places. So now we're going to jump right into our presentation, Arkansas Pioneers, Homes and Ways of Life. Okay, so in the early 1800s, something happened that changed America and Arkansas forever for both white settlers and Native Americans. It was during the 1700s that this land had been claimed by Spain, then France. France then sold the land to America in 1803, and this purchase was called the Louisiana Purchase. As you can see from the map there, this basically doubled the size of the United States with this purchase. So once Louisiana Purchase lands opened up for settlement, people were very ready to move west. They were called pioneers. At this early stage in Arkansas settlement, there were no trains, there are no paved roads. Therefore, it's going to be very difficult for travel to occur. People had to move into the state on boats and in wagons, like the one pictured here. Just because they came in a wagon, that does not mean that it made it any easier for travel, because there are going to be few roads. A lot of times they were using basically what you would call a pig trail to get these wagons down and to continue moving west. There's lots of difficult terrain in Arkansas, so that was also a factor in their travel. So, some everyday necessities that pioneers couldn't make or grow themselves once they arrived, they had to bring in those wagons. There are going to be very few stores on the journey west. You have hundreds of miles with no stores or hotels or restaurants at all. So what did they need to bring with them that they couldn't buy on the journey? Well, we have tools, guns, ammunition, salt and spices, coffee, sugar, pots and pans. So the route to Arkansas was usually a long, arduous trip. One family who moved to Arkansas right after the Civil War was named the Page family, and they came all the way from Mississippi. Now, this picture shows the route to Pope County, which will be near Dover, Arkansas. The route that they took was 360 miles from Herbert, Mississippi to Shot Bluff in northern Pope County. It took them 3 months of travel to reach this spot in northern Arkansas. And it's very hard for us to imagine, looking out over wilderness as far as the eye can see, that this is what they had to look at for 3 months. Pioneers set out into the wilderness going 2 miles an hour, pulling a heavy wagon, hoping for a new start on their own land. There was no stopping at Walmart or Taco Bell like we can do when we travel today. When they arrived, they found a mostly untouched land, which means that they had to build their own homes from the materials that they had at hand. What kind of building material was plentiful here? As we can see from this picture, plenty of wood. However, they don't have sawmills or the ability to turn trees into lumber, so they had to use the logs themselves. Of course, a lot of their furniture also was made from the trees on their land. So, how did pioneers build a log house? It was very important to bring certain tools with them from the east that they could not get along the way, things like axes and saws. Now, because building a log house was fundamental to survival in this new land, this is the first thing that they did when they reached their destination. Sometimes there were neighbors to help, but most of the time there were not. Some built houses with round logs. However, that leaves a larger space between the logs, which would let in rain and air. Most preferred squared off logs. It was better to take the bark off the logs because the bark harbors insects. It would soak up the rain and that would encourage rot. So there were a couple of good reasons why it was better to square off your logs. So step one is to build a foundation. It was important to build a strong foundation for a cabin to sit on before the work of putting together the building itself started. Some would use foundations like this, especially if their site was on hilly ground, which is what a an issue they did incur when they got to Arkansas. There wasn't flat terrain. A lot of the ground was hilly. So you would use rocks that were, from the creek or on their land. They would use that to build it up. And then they would have log and stone underpinning. Step 2 is cutting notches into the logs, the round logs. The first step to do this helps them, one, to kind of establish a depth and to maintain an even pull as they actually took the bark off of the log as they cut into it. Step 3, scraping the log down to the depth of the notches. If you look at this picture, I think it's the angle of the picture, it almost looks like the squared off side is actually larger than the round side, but of course that's not the case. But you can see on one end where they did start scraping the log and squaring it off. Step 4, make larger notches in the ends of the logs and fit them together. I like to point out to my students, if they've ever played with their Lincoln logs, if their parents have any, to pass down to them, it's the exact same concept. These large notches in the end of the log help them to fit together and stabilize them so they would not slide off. A popular notch was the dovetail. The purpose of notching the log like this was that rainwater would slide off the log. If you had a notch that was more flattened, then of course that rainwater would just accumulate and stay right there, and then of course rot the log. Step 5, the cracks between the logs had to be filled with extra bits of wood, and then a plaster would be applied that is called chink. Chink was basically made with mud, clay, and animal hair, fur, horse hair. That kind of helped thicken up the chink and made it to where whenever it did solidify, it kind of held together that much better. Step 6, to add the plaster between the logs. Like I said, you would put all those things together, smear it in between the logs, and you can see from this picture the more clay colored strips there, that is your chink. You would slather that on, and then once it dried, it would harden up and it would keep the elements outside. Now, an interesting fact here is that during the summer months, as we all know, especially here in Arkansas, the summer months can be sweltering hot. So if you were lucky enough to have cut a window, that window, of course, was going to offer you some wind and air coming inside, but they did not have air conditioning. So a common habit was to remove a couple of lines of the chink on one wall and then the opposing wall that faces it to create kind of a cross, what do you call that? A cross stream of air, kind of and give you a breeze so that it wasn't too hot in the house. Step 7 is adding a roof. Once the walls are up, it's time for the roof. There is a long ridge pole that would go along the center of the roof, and then you would add rafters, then the shingles or the boards, and remember, these are going to be handmade. Then the doorway is going to be cut, and the door would be added. Step 8, adding a fireplace, because although it is very hot in the summer months, it is cold in the winter months. Fireplace is going to be essential for warmth, but also for cooking. So you would cut a hole in the side of the house. And on the outside, you would make a chimney with stones from the local creek. Some pioneers would be able to make their own bricks. They could fire their own bricks if they had that skill. But more times than not, it was stones from the land or from the creek. And you would use, on the inside, you would use boards to shore up the inside, make sure that you don't have any airflow, and then you would have your chimney completed. Step 9 is to add a floor. Most Arkansas pioneers had a wooden rather than a dirt floor. And I guess that probably goes to, think about if you were, had a dirt floor, different things that can come burrowing up into the cabin, things that you do not want to share space with. So you could use boards or half a log that you would cut. You cut the log in two, and then you take that half log and you would line up the half logs with the cut side up, secure it down, and this was called a puncheon floor. Step 10, cut your windows. Some log homes actually had no windows. I like to think that once log homes were being built in Arkansas, they revised that belief very quickly. Because again, there's so many months that are with such humidity and heat that you would want airflow. Some windows had a wooden shutter to let the light and the air in. A lot of the log homes that we're going to see in this presentation, of course, have had windows added through the generations. Future generations did add windows, but of course, when these pioneer homes were first built, there was no glass available. So the only thing that you had to close up that hole was the shutter. So this is what the inside of a finished cabin looks like. Now, this is actually the floor plan of the Scott Page, his home, and he did very well for himself. Most cabins are not going to be this big. Most cabins were going to be 20 by 20, and you had usually a family of anywhere from 5 to 8. You know, that was a typical family for the pioneer time. So this is the house plan for the Scott Page home in Pope County. It was built by Mr. Page and his family after settling in Moccasin Creek in 1868, which was just after the Civil War. Notice that no one had their own room. Page says that the small room with a bed next to the lean-in kitchen was mostly only used in the summer because it had no heat and was barely big enough for a full-size bed. Then you have the main room that has the fireplace. They were lucky enough to have another fireplace, it looks like, in the kitchen area. There's also a sparking room, which was set aside for the privacy of young couples who were courting. It wasn't like if your 16-year-old daughter had someone come court her, that they could go to the local drive-in or go out to eat at Taco Bell. They had to stay there. So this would allow them some privacy in the sparking room. I'm sure the door was always left open. So types of log houses. And remember, all of these cabins are on the National Register. So this is a single pen. It's a sturdy log cabin built by, this one here was built by Simon Sager around 1830 in Siloam Springs. A pen is another word for a room. So a single pen cabin has only the one room. So why would a pioneer build a house with just one room, even if it had 6 or 7 people in the family? Well, it is very hard work to build a cabin by hand, especially if you have only a few tools to help. Some pioneers didn't even have nails, so they had to use wooden pegs. It's also easier to heat just the one room than it would be to heat many rooms. So, like I said, this cabin was built by Simon Sager. He was a German immigrant from Germany who immigrated to the United States in 1832. He initially settled with a group of German immigrants in St. Louis, but then eventually he moved west to Arkansas. And this home here, this house, is considered the first permanent residence built in the area around Siloam Springs. And that is why it is on the National Register of Historic Places. Okay, so this too is a single pen cabin. However, it does have a second story. This is the Parker Hickman House. It was built in 1850 in Newton County. Another single pen house. But like I said, this one, what's different about it is that it does have a second story. It also has a lean-to shed that's built onto the side. This house was built in 1850. He did buy land just 3 years earlier, and so he eventually expanded his homestead to over 195 acres. He did very good for himself as well. The farm is considered a historic district because there's a large number of historic buildings on the property. And again, it's important to remember that the reason why this log cabin is still standing is because it was customary for the next generation to move into the home. The oldest child usually would inherit that. So this here is a double pen cabin, which is basically just a 2-room cabin. Each side has its own door. So what do you think this style of house is called? I'm sorry, we're going to start that over. So this house has 2 pens, each with its own door. The double pen features 2 joined pens with 1 or more chimneys located on the ends. This house was built in 1880 by Monroe and Ada May. They were born and raised in the area, and they were the children of previous pioneers. They raised 4 children in this house and were active in the local community. Now, this house and many double pen cabins actually started out as a single pen. And what they end up doing is on one of the exterior walls, they end up basically cutting a door into it. Then they add 3 walls, extend the roof out over it, and make it into a double pen cabin. Of course, with the chimney being on one end of it, they do add a chimney to the other end so you don't get too cold, because that one chimney could not heat the entire structure. So now you have heat coming in from both ends towards the middle. Now, there were times when in the building phase that the cabin was intended to be a double pen from the beginning, and we call this a saddlebag. A saddlebag has 2 pens, but the difference is that since it was intended to be a 2-room cabin, they put the chimney in the middle, and it's a double-sided chimney so that it actually heats from the middle out to both sides. Now, in their mind, and how this cabin got the name saddlebag is if you look at it, the chimney itself looks like the horn of a saddle with the bags on either its side. Okay, the Plum Bayou House, which is currently at Historic Arkansas Museum in downtown Little Rock, is also a double pen cabin. Notice the 2 individual pens, but this style of double pen cabin is called a dog trot. The dog trot style features 2 pens that are separated by an open passageway through which the family dog could actually trot through. Basically, this provides a breezeway between the 2 pens. So, of course, we probably have a very good idea as to why that breezeway is there. It provides a cool space for the family to stay during the summer months. I guess you could call it an early form of air conditioning. If you have mom snapping peas, or they're just sitting outside talking, whatever it is, it's nice to have this covered area so the sun isn't beating down on them, and then the air that flows through it providing a little bit of a breeze. This house was originally located near Scott, Arkansas, but was moved to the Historic Arkansas Museum in the 1970s. It's now part of the exhibits at Ham, and you can visit it during their open hours. This cabin here is also a dog trot, but it's a dog trot with a second floor. This 2-story dog trot is the Wolf House in North Fork, Arkansas. It was built by Major Jacob Wolf around 1825 in the earliest days of the Arkansas Territory. It was the site of county government for Izard County. Jacob Wolf was the first postmaster in Izard, and later went on to serve in the Territorial Assembly and the state legislature. This building is actually the oldest public structure standing in Arkansas. So, life in a pioneer home. So, pioneer homes were usually very small. A house for 6 people, like I said earlier, might be 20 by 20 feet. Sometimes it would have a loft. There's not a whole lot of room for furniture, so it looks like it's very sparsely decorated. But again, if you've got 6 people and you've got to fit a bed in there, plus you need a table, so, you know, for eating, yes, you did not want wall-to-wall furniture. So washing during pioneer days, very different from what we would consider sanitary today. Boys were allowed to swim in the creek, but a lot of girls were rarely ever submerged in water. They felt like it was bad because they didn't feel like girls could swim as well as boys. Um, Baths were rare since the water had to be hauled in. So a lot of time you would have a wash basin that are pictured here. You would wash your hands, neck, arms um, every day at that basin. Um, a lot of times a washing basin would be a family heirloom that was passed down from generation to generation, from mother to daughter, like the one here on the, well, I guess pictured on my right. And then the stone basin, and a dipper was also used a lot of times, but of course that was just a rock that they had to burrow out, and wasn't the pretty ornamental one like the ceramic one that they used. Okay, beds. The frame in pioneer beds were made of ropes. The mattress would be placed on top. And I believe that this is a serious contributing factor to why everyone was up at the crack of dawn. I do not believe that these beds were the most comfortable. You did not have a mattress that you bought down at Hank's that had a pillow top and all the creature comforts that we know today. Mattresses were actually stuffed with corn husk, feathers, straw, newspaper if they had it. That would be crammed into that mattress as tightly as they could, sewn up, and then that was your mattress that was put on the bed frame of ropes. So again, not the most comfortable night's sleep. Okay, a fireplace, of course, is going to be very important because your meals are going to be cooked over the fire. Some kitchens became detached from the rest of the house with later pioneers who were building cabins. And it's because, of course, the kitchen generated so much heat, it would just make it sweltering hot within the cabin. It also reduced on the frequency of fires. If you have an ember that might, get away from you a little bit and fall somewhere in a log home, it was easy for it to catch fire. Some pots of food hung over the fire. Sometimes they were placed in coals and were covered with more coals placed on top, and that would cook the food kind of in a buried heating way. Chores. Typical chores, and although some boys would do the girl chores and vice versa, it's just easier to kind of break it down with boys versus girl chores. And a lot of times the girl chores didn't reflect the fact that they could not do the men's work. It was just that if you had a child, an infant or a toddler, they couldn't be out in the woods cutting down trees or mending fences. They would actually be more of a hindrance than a help. So the girls would stay either to tend to the babies, or the moms would stay to tend to the babies. So some of the men's chores were they would tend the crops, the farm animals. They would repair the buildings and the fences. They went hunting. They chopped wood, and they hauled the water. For the women, they would cook and preserve food. They milked the cows. The vegetable gardens that were closer to the home, they tended to those. They would dye and weave the cloth, sewed and washed clothes. They made quilts, soap, and candles. And they, a lot of times, were the ones practicing the herbal medicine. So this here are some pictures taken from the from the Plum Bayou House at Historic Arkansas Museum. These are all working, like the loom there. It is a working loom. I'm going to do my best to explain, but you have to remember that making clothes and cloths was a big part of women's work. Making the yarn and then making cloth from the yarn is a process. It wasn't like you could go to Hancock Fabrics and get what you want if any of you do sew or your parents sew. It is hard to kind of understand that you didn't even have that fabric. You had to make the things that you could make the fabric with. So once you did have the yarn that you could, make the cloth, then you had to make the clothes from the cloth. You could buy cloth in the country or general stores, but it was very expensive for some families to do that. And that's actually how these patchwork quilts actually came to be. I always thought it was just, fun to design on with all these different patches of cloth. But the truth of the matter is that if you made fabric, or you went and bought your fabric, you might have a small square or a piece of fabric left over from whatever clothing you were making. Well, you didn't just throw those squares away. You actually held on to them until you had enough that you could patch them all together, and then you would have this patchwork quilt like you see in the bottom left. You could hang that quilt frame from the ceiling to kind of save space. Because remember, I mean, not everyone's going to have this huge loom in their cabin. There just wasn't room for it. So you had a quilting frame that you would make quilts from. Okay, so washing clothes. Again, you don't have a laundromat or a washing machine there in the cabin. That chore was left to mom or the girls there in the family. They would wash the clothes in the tubs, and it was usually an all-day task. You had to heat the water, boil and wash the clothes, and you had to hang them to dry. And the washing of the clothes wasn't as simple, scrub it on the linen pan, I'm sorry, I forgot the name of it, the washboard. It wasn't as just an easy task of a couple times. Dad might wear the same shirt, go outside, work in the fields, get, it sweaty and everything, and he might wear that for a week before it gets washed. It was a scrubbing process that took a whole lot of hard effort on the person who was doing it, whether, on the back and the arms. It was a very arduous effort. Let me see. You would stand behind the washboard and lean it over the tub, dip that piece of clothing into the tub to get it wet, rub soap on it, dip, scrub, dip, scrub, dip, scrub over and over again. If any of you ever get a chance to go to Cracker Barrel, look up on the walls. And if you have any, kids there and you're dining with you that night, point out some of the things on the wall that they might have heard about, but to actually see it in person and see it and be able to actually know kind of what it looks like, it makes a big difference. Okay. Other chores that had to be done included making candles. You have no electricity, so it's very hard to light up during the night. And if you have to make that trip to the outhouse, the last thing you want to be doing is going in the dark. Milk the cows, churning butter. That butter churner there at the top left, I've actually had a student tell me one time, I asked if they knew what any of these things were, and he knew exactly what that was. It was a door stop because that's what his grandmother used it for, to keep the door open during the summer months. A lot of our younger kids do not know what these things are, so take an opportunity to let them know. Most pioneers had a vegetable garden. They would enjoy fresh veggies and salads in the summer. They would can and preserve for the wintertime. They preserved their food in jars. If any of your grandparents do any canning, make jams or pickles or anything, pay attention and learn that process. It's not something that's just done every day by everybody. Toys. Life wasn't all work and no play. Even though children had to make their own toys out of the materials that they had available to them, they were things that they enjoyed very much and they played with. Again, you can't go to Toys R Us, Walmart to buy a toy. You had to make it yourself. Examples include a slingshot made with twine and leather. Dolls were made out of corn husks. A bean flip was made out of wood and leather. And then you would see windmills that were also made out of wood. So pioneer way of life in Arkansas lasted well into the 1900s. It was actually World War I and World War II, the radio, and then roads that helped bring the modern world into Arkansas. This right here is a picture that I'm sure we all have in our family. This is normal attire, and a homestead was very, was very common with our grandparents or great grandparents. So the Ozark Folk Center in Mountain View keeps pioneer ways of life and crafts alive. You can go visit it anytime. I can't say for right now with everything being closed, but I know that whenever they are open, the Ozark Folk Center tries to have a pioneer craft every day, whether it's basket weaving or ironworks. They do have a blacksmith that comes in, I do believe, once a week. So these are the activities that you can go and learn about. And that is all I have. There's our website down at the bottom. If you would like to learn more about us, or like I said, you can contact me through email, or you can give me a call. My number is 501-324-9786. Okay. Now what do I do to get off share screen?
All right, go ahead and on the bottom of your screen.
Oh, wait.
There you go. Good. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that, Miss Amy. I know I learned a lot just now. Some of those terms I wasn't familiar with. So thank you so much for this presentation, and I hope you're enjoying your summer.